West, the Red Baron, and I believe this is a real person, right? And his name is Manfred von Richthofen. And I may have said that wrong. My bad. I'm American. He had 80 confirmed aerial victories, and he was the top scoring ace of World War I. He was known for killing the most people in the air. And we have a set, again, set number 10024, that is literally called the Red Baron. And on top of all of that, it features an official Lego sticker of, drumroll please, the Iron Cross of World War I, which was the primary German military award for bravery, and it was instituted by Kaiser Wilhelm in 1914. Hello, bricks, chicks, and minifigures. You are listening to AFOLs Welcome, where we talk about all things Lego from the perspective of two adult collectors. We are your co-host. I'm Grinch.
And I'm West.
And today we are discussing when Lego breaks their own rules, specifically when it comes to military representation in our favorite plastic brick. But before we do that, West, how was your week? I'm tired. I've been going 7 to 11 every day at a conference for the past week, and my flight was delayed a few hours last night, and I'm here ready to go, ready to forget about that and talk about some Lego.
Yeah, Grinch, it's been a doozy of the week for me too. Just getting everything squared away that we need to for our upcoming move, and just figuring out everything else with life. So to be honest, not a lot of Lego going on in the immediate short term, but hopefully I'll turn that around at some point. We'll see. So
yeah, I get it. I didn't really get to build any Lego, but I did, like, last weekend after we recorded. I worked on my mocks, of course. I'm gonna continue that this weekend. Brick World Chicago's coming up. I'm feeling pretty good about them. So, yeah. How about we get over to some exciting news?
Let's do it.
Exciting Lego news.
Well, Grinch, this week we had one big reveal. Not a ton for reveals this week, some announcements, but let's get right into it. First up, Lego revealed the Marvel Shield Helicarrier, which that was kind of a surprise. We'll talk more about that later. Happy Plants 2 was formally revealed, the newest botanical series, sort of sub-series, I suppose, a follow-up to the Happy Plants 1. These ones, the new change to them, in addition to the plants being different and the color schemes of like the little pots that have arms and faces, is that they wobble. And so that's kind of their new kitschy feature. For some announcements, the Bricklink Designers Program Series 10 finalists were announced, and crowdfunding, just so you get on top of it, will start in February 2027. So ladies and gentlemen of the AFOLs Welcome podcast community, you have another 10 months before you are able to crowdfund for those. So, but you have plenty of notice. Lego also released a fan compass survey that continues through April 30th. I actually took the survey last night. If you have any interest in providing some feedback to Lego, this is an opportunity, and let us know what your thoughts were. And then lastly, the Lego Star Wars Camino training facility gift with purchase will return in March of 2026. Grinch, what is exciting about this exciting Lego news?
Well, the new DC, no, I'm just kidding. The Marvel Helicarrier, obviously very exciting. I've typically, when something like this is announced, I like to kind of scroll through Reddit comments, social media, just to get a vibe. I was busy this week, but I was like, I don't need to do that because I can already hear it's cheaper than the last one that we got and less piece, or more expensive than the last we got, and there's less pieces. So just Lego just doesn't understand what their people want, which it's neither here nor there. That sentiment, and part of the reason that is because nobody liked the first helicarrier, and that's a generalization. I really liked it. I think it's become more popular over time, but when it was first revealed, it did not sell well. It was reviewed poorly. It was thought of being overpriced at the time. It was too big, bulky, plain. Believe it or not, some people didn't like the nano figures. Like, it did not have a great sentiment overall, and that's changed over time. I mean, it's become like cool. Nano figures like much cooler. Price to part ratio looked a lot better as time went on. So it's really interesting that you kind of get a little bit of a repeat of history here, and also I think most notably, there's no nano figures in this one, right? So it's it's gonna be a lot of the same sentiment of like, who asked for this at this point? It's smaller, the price to part ratio is bad. Lego doesn't know what they want. I think it looks really good. I think it's clean.
Yeah.
It's gonna look good on display. Between this one and the first one, it doesn't feel like, what 14 years in Lego has gone by. I think that's a testament to the first one maybe being a little bit ahead of its time and just not appreciated when it was out. But what it does feel like is when we had the architecture sets kind of be redone, and they redid stuff like the Empire State Building, there was nothing wrong with the first one, but this one just feels like a classier, smoother, more well-polished version of that original.
Yeah, I'm pulling up the side-by-side photos just to compare them, but the newest one, I mean, it looks like a really clean model. So, I mean, I think if you're interested in the subject or buying it, we have to kind of start there and acknowledge that, like, this thing, it looks nice. The build itself, I mean, yeah, I'm looking at the old one now, Grinch, and what really stands out to me are the turbine sort of sections of the old one and the pieces that they used. And so they used those 2x2 sloped tile pieces, and they kind of did them in a standard building technique that you'll see Lego do when they're trying to build something round without having round pieces. And they've kind of set them off in little increments. So it looks kind of like an octagon of those pieces surrounding the engine. And the new one has a circular, it looks almost like a circular cheese slope, like a quarter round circular cheese slope macaroni tile piece. So like a combination of a macaroni tile and a cheese slope, if that makes sense, that surrounds the engine bay. I actually think that's a new piece that was not called out.
It's a cheese slope. It's the same angle,
which is really
33
cool.
degree.
Yeah, and I saw some other people talking about other cheese slopes. So we're getting the inverted cheese slope in this one as well, and a 1x3 cheese slope, which, remember, were two pieces that we argued that we absolutely needed in the cheese slope line. And we're getting a ton of them in this set. For me, the one thing that I do not like is I do not like the stickers on the helicarrier deck. I really feel like those could have been prints. That is, in my opinion, the only thing that truly detracts from this set. And recall that we've had three. This is the third iteration of the helicarrier. So we've had this one. There was sort of that MIDI scale one that came out about 3 or 4 years ago, and now we have
just last year.
2
years ago. Yeah.
And now we have this, the newest one. And so I think it's fun to revisit this subject. It's a big set. The minifigures look fantastic. I think if you were to compare this side by side with the old one, this new one would be, it's going to look a lot more polished than the previous version. So I think Marvel fans should enjoy it, but it's a lot of money for, a big display piece. So I understand why people might be a little frustrated with what they're getting. So.
Yeah, well, it's I mean, to give you an exact size comparison here, too, I actually haven't seen anybody do that yet because these must not be out in LAN. It's probably just been revealed. I haven't seen any reviews of it yet. But the original used the 8x16 tile, the UCS plaque. They had those printed for some of the runway section.
Yeah.
The other part of the runway section was stickered. And so with that larger plaque piece, there's texture on the front of it to help reduce scratches. And on the tiles, it's smooth. So you get that glossy finish.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I did not like that because I liked the print. I did not like that you had a mix of the both because there's two different textures, right? It's like one's matte and one's gloss. And so this is, while it's all stickers in this case, it looks like it's just maybe a few down the middle and then the other parts are brick built. It's hard to exactly tell with some of the images, but it looks like the sides are brick built and then you have the middle stripe going down and that's a sticker. And it looks like the entire runway section is actually, the black part of it is 6 wide. And then you've got a little bit of a side accent that goes out to 8. So just to give you some perspective, with that other runway being kind of more of an 8 center with some accent on the side, this is a 6 center with some accent on the side.
And Grinch, actually, I wanted to call out a few things because you're half correct. The entire deck is actually studs on the side building. And so that center stripe is actually just Lego brick built center stripe. And so are the side markings too. And so, and it's actually
so the
7
stickers
wide.
Only the Avengers logo there then?
The Avengers logo and then the small striping, the white striping.
There's some dotted line that is, yeah.
Yep. And then the 64, for example, going across the front of it is a sticker as well. You know, the problem with this, and I suppose kudos, right? Like this was always a common complaint of someone like Jang, was that the stickers always looked better in the images. Like in these images, though, you see the contrast of the sticker on the black brick. So I guess on one hand, they're not hiding it, or you know, hiding sounds like you're doing it intentionally, right? But in this case, it looks like it was a photograph of a real model and not a digital model. So I suppose kudos. The problem though is like the sticker does contrast significantly with the black glossy deck material, and that's where I think again it doesn't quite work. But I mean, I think that studs, you know, the building on the side technique there for the deck is actually incredible. And if you're taking plates, you know, 8x16 plates for the UCS plaque piece, this is immensely a lot more pieces that are going into this deck than maybe before. Again, right? Like you're seeing over the last 14 years how much Lego has changed. You know, look at the engines. We already talked about how there's like a cheese slope macaroni tile that goes around the engine. Well, Lego is using a lot more pieces to go and build that cowling on the engine previously. And now they have one cohesive piece that cleans it up and reduces the piece count. So if you're sitting here frustrated that the piece count has dropped and you feel like you're getting less, I would encourage you to take a good look at the two models and really ask yourself, like, where did those pieces go? Because I think we've got some pretty good examples of where newer pieces have come out that cleans this thing up significantly, and ultimately reduces the piece count. So I'm actually, I don't know if I would buy it, but like looking at this thing, I think it looks fantastic. I'm now kind of more pro helicarrier than before, especially considering the older version of it. So
I think my sentiment, and I don't want to speak for you, but I think I'm picking this up as well, is it's going to be hard to say this one is worse than the other one because there's less pieces and it's more expensive, right? Because if we look at the runways, we just kind of outlined the same issue with them, but different, right? Yes, you can see the stickers. You can see the stickers on the other one, and you have another texture there. So there may be a couple more stickers, but at least this one's maybe a little bit more clean and consistent as far as that like overall polish feel goes, right? Like it's stickers throughout it versus just stickers and then a change of texture and some stickers. And then, like you said, certainly, when we talked with Brick Architect, this is Lego in 4K.
Yeah.
The other one's Lego in HD.
1080p.
So for the astute eye, for the cinephile, for the person who enjoys TV, they got it. They could see the difference. My wife, on the other hand, she thinks 4K is overrated. So,
I mean, $400 is a steep price for this thing, but I think it looks fantastic, and the minifigures are great. The Captain America is a new mold, the
new shield,
new kind of design, too. Right? So yeah, I think if you're a fan of Marvel, this is the best Marvel helicarrier we're going to get for a long time. And I would imagine, due to the sequencing of these, like, you're probably not going to get one for a while. So, fill your boots, I guess, and enjoy what you can, because this is it.
And the next one we're going to get is going to be $850.
But, well, for real, right? Though, like, Marvel over the last 5 years has had kind of a tenuous relationship with the story, the fans, the MCU. I think a lot of people who weren't familiar with Marvel, who got into the MCU, started to realize just how crazy like the Marvel universe is, with kind of the ways the MCU is trying to incorporate stuff that really felt sort of frenetic, and the pacing of all that got really weird. You had the whole issues with what's his face, the Kang actor, who kind of derailed Marvel's plans, and just Majors, everything's kind of weird right now. Yeah, Jonathan Majors. So we're in a weird spot with Marvel. We're getting the Doctor Doom movie, which we'll see how that plays out, if it's good, if it's bad. We're getting a new Spider-Man movie this year, but I guess what I'm saying is, like, in 10 years, if it takes another 14 years to get a UCS style helicarrier, right, we're not going to be looking back in 14. We'll still look back and be like, yeah, those Marvel movies, like that phase 1, 2, and 3 were like awesome. But you know what I mean? Like, we're not going to look back on that, and it's not going to be as immediately fresh. So that's why I'm saying, like, this is probably the last big helicarrier we're going to get for a while, because the universe, unless it reboots or whatever, needs a break. So,
well, Spider-Man Brand New Day trailer just dropped, broke the record.
Yeah,
first movie trailer to reach 1 billion views and counting. So,
well, that Spider-Man series is goated, I would say, at this point. So,
well, so I think you talked a little bit about the Happy Plants. I thought it was interesting that they brought back the Camino training facility for folks that maybe just got into Lego or have forgotten. That was the May the 4th promo last year. So that is actually through like April 5th. So by the time you're listening to this, there's still a couple days left. I believe it's $160. And then the survey, we joked a few episodes ago now about how there was the survey on gift with purchases back in 2018 that I filled out and am now responsible for the current state of gift with purchases. So
yeah, it's all Grinch.
It is all me. And that, but that goes to show that Lego does seemingly use these surveys. So if you've got some big feelings, if you've got some little feelings, if you've got a lot of feelings, go ahead, fill out the survey. Now is your time to be heard more so than in the comments of Reddit or a YouTube video.
Yeah, Grinch, I'm curious about this Camino one. Again, right? We don't know. The problem with talking about Lego from like an analytical perspective is that we don't know how many sets they produce. And so all we're left with for indicators of performance for, how well sets do are things like, does it ever go on sale, right? Are they ever offering a, gift with purchase or an insider's points thing with that set? Not every big Lego release has an associated gift with purchase with it. So we can sort of assume that the gift with purchase is a vehicle used to sort of induce day one purchases. this one came out last year, and I know a lot of people were excited for it, or at least it seemed like it on the the Lego blogosphere, if you will. But I think the fact that it's coming back either tells us not a lot of people bought May the 4th sets last year, or they overproduced because they thought more people would buy stuff. In either way, I think it's a decent indication that some sort of metric was not met internally with Lego, and they have more of these than they thought. Either that, people didn't buy as much for May the 4th, or they made more of them thinking people would buy more. So interesting that comes back. It's not impossible or not super rare for gift with purchases to be recycled, but generally, if the set is something that people really, really want, the gift with purchase is done and it doesn't come back. So it's interesting to see this one coming back. And I think a decent indicator that something didn't quite match up with expectation from the Lego Group's perspective.
Which is funny because this was a really liked gift with purchase. And I remember I actually ended up getting 2 and I sold one of them for like $80. Like, people liked this gift with, like, the Star Wars fans thought it was great. But there's a couple hypotheses that pop into my head. Somebody accidentally tripped over a giant pallet of them at a warehouse and they said, "Oh crap, let's get these out." Or maybe it did do really well and they're like, you know what, we're just seeing a little lull before Star Wars. We got May the 4th coming up, but it'd be even better if we push this thing out a month beforehand and really got people exciting. And then so when we had these new Lego Star Wars reveals, it got people going even more on May the 4th. I don't know. The timing of it's a little interesting because of that, but so it depends. Do you want to have a cynical approach or a positive approach?
That seems counterproductive almost, right? Because we know that there's going to be a big May the 4th promo and May the 4th push. And so now they're trying to push people to buy stuff in April, which fair, but let's assume that we as consumers have a limited budget for Lego, right? I know not all of us fall in that category, but let's assume for a second. And if you had $200 to spend on Lego, would you want to spend it in April on something that's already out, or would it behoove them to wait for the new thing they're releasing to try to get you to spend that money then in May? And I get that our thought process or our thought exercise here is artificial and that we're sort of limiting our budget to some extent. Like, why can't we have both? But I think there is, by and large, our constraints and restraints that we put on ourselves in terms of spending for Lego. And so it is interesting to see this push ahead of time. I don't know. It raises some interesting questions. And especially now too, when the global economy is what it is. I mean, the last few weeks have been rough, to say the least.
But let's think about this the exact same way, but with a different outcome. You said essentially we have a limited budget to spend on Lego. The global economy's in the crap hole, so we're spending less right now. We know May the 4th's coming up, so I'm not going to spend anything right now because I'm going to save for that. So if I'm Lego and I say, you're thinking of it as the consumer, I'll think of it as Lego. If people aren't spending as much, we know people are saving out for May the 4th. We've got this gift with purchase that really resonated. It did quite well last year. What if we dropped that this month, got people to spend that money now, and then it dropped something really exciting on May the 4th and got them to spend money again? The purpose of a promotion is not to give somebody a discount on a product they're already going to buy, West.
Yeah, I understand your logic, right? But you're also assuming that they then are not adhering to their budget, which, like I'm saying, if you only have $200,
have you talked to an American ever? Do you understand how much credit card debt the average American has?
I get that. The strategy is predicated on whatever is coming out for May the 4th to be so good that it forces you to make a bad decision. Either way, I feel like as a consumer, like, not a great sentiment or position to be in, but I hear your point. I get that.
It costs Lego money to do this. They have to make more money if they're going to do it. So.
Yeah. It's interesting. Well, we assume, right? I mean, Lego makes mistakes all the time. So
Yeah, but just with the duration of this, like, I mean, they would have had to literally find like a corner of a warehouse worth of sets. Like, you know, if you think of the Pokemon pre-order, they said they did like what 10,000 for the US, like, and that was gone in 12 hours. Like,
yeah. I'll throw another scenario at you, a hypothetical, which is that Lego's like, dude, we don't know what May's gonna bring, so let's just get sales in now with a gift with purchase we know people liked, and see if like, let's cut our losses here. Let's get what we can in April, because not to like bring this into the real world, because it's not great right now, and I feel like that dog in that cartoon where everything's on fire and the dog's like, it's fine.
Everything's fine.
These high oil prices that we're seeing are probably going to continue through the summer. To be honest, there's no way that the straits open up to a point where oil production, unless what's going on in the Middle East just like suddenly gets better overnight. Which, I mean, we can pretend and hope and dream, but the reality is it probably won't. And so the ramifications of that are, I'm curious if Lego's just like, yeah, let's try to cut our losses and just get the sales in now that we can before things really get gnarly, because we're not sure what the next 2 to 3 months looks like. So curious what your thoughts are on that, Grinch. I mean, I also think that your thought process makes sense too, but I'm wondering if there's just more instability here than playing its kind of second and third order effects on the market, maybe, than what is apparent.
Usually when a company sees instability coming, they may do like layoffs or something like that, right? They'll adjust you cut loss versus spend money to make money sort of mentality, right? So if they did produce more gift with purchases,
money.
If they produced more gift with purchases, they're taking a risk, they're taking up inventory space, they're advertising it,
but you're assuming
adding promos to the website.
Added more gift with purchases. I guess I'm approaching this from the perspective of the batch they made. They had some left over.
Okay. Yeah.
So they've already spent the money. They're not spending more money. They already spent the money on gift with purchase. Do we know? I mean, I guess this is an interesting question. Do we know that? Do they restart production on gift with purchases, or is it like when they build them, they're done? Right? Like that would be the
no idea.
Because if they do restart it, your point absolutely stands, right? That like, yeah, they're spending more money now to reissue these sets. So
my guess is they reran it only because we see stuff like the blue shell return to the insider rewards. We've seen that happen with like the micro cities from Ninjago, et cetera, right? So it could just be similar to that.
Absolutely. I mean, the other thing too to think about is, they're Lego sets, right? So ostensibly, they're not running, like when they're running a production of Lego sets, like modern Lego, it's all just pieces that they're building. So if they had these pieces just floating around in the inventory, the large bin inventory that they had, like putting them into boxes again, like isn't a huge cost on their end, because the cost is really the plastic, not the boxes and the instructions, right? So I mean, I would imagine
a larger part of the cost, or larger than you think, is the instructions, because those had to be printed. Sure. And then even just making sure you've got the right box, right? I mean, you're talking cents
that's fair.
Per set, but you've got to run, you got to do the printing, you got to do all that on the box as well. They didn't just have boxes of corrugate sitting out there with Clone Camino facilities sitting on them. They would have had to order
You'd have
those.
To reorder them.
Probably would have had to order those back in October.
Yeah.
So probably 6 months lead at least.
Pre-planned. Yeah.
Correct. So I don't think there's an old saying, hope's not a strategy, right? So it wouldn't be like, oh, let's just, we hope, we think it's going down to, so we're just going to throw this out there and see what happens. So it's interesting. One where we wish we definitely had more visibility, but that is more of a pipe dream than anything else. So and certainly not something that Lego is driving themselves, that lack of visibility. That's just business in general. But that being said, why don't we move over to today's topic? Today's topic. All right, so a few weeks ago, we tackled the behemoth conversation of Lego's ethics in action. And one area we did not really dive into, well, we mentioned it, it's fairly well known, and we wanted to spend the bulk of that conversation on the other aspects of this, but that is specifically Lego's stance on producing military vehicles, weapons, etc. However, as the Lego fan knows, this can sometimes be a bit of a gray area, and it seems, and Lego themselves has actually said fantasy is okay, but reality is not necessarily okay. However, even with that all being said, we've seen a few examples, and I think West is really going to dive into another example here very recently with probably, I don't want to speak for you, West, but a top maybe 10 Lego set for you of all time, potentially. Certainly, at least potentially going to challenge a place up there once you build it. But West, why did the DC3 inspire this topic?
Well, Grinch, I mean, we were chatting about this on the side before this airplane came out, and we'll kind of talk through it a little bit more. The weird thing with the Lego Icons line, and specifically something like aviation, is that when you talk about something like aviation, the history of aviation is so intertwined with military history too. It would be akin to talking about cars or like Jeep, for example, if you were going to take the history of like Jeep, the manufacturer, right? And just sort of not talk about the fact that, what made Jeep so famous was the initial, the early Jeeps used in World War II, right? And so thinking about aviation as well, relatively quickly after the dawn of aviation came World War I, just within 15 or so years of the Wright brothers flying the first airplane, the first manned, flight. We were using airplanes in war. And so it's weird to talk about or to build these models without acknowledging, their connection to the military, right? And it's not just the DC-3, the 747 and the shuttle carrying aircraft from last year. The NASA astronauts, a lot of them were military pilots, at least the first few. Neil Armstrong himself, while he was a civilian during the Apollo period, was a Navy veteran and had worked as an Air Force civilian at Edwards Air Force Base as a test pilot. And so there's this really weird interconnected history there. I wouldn't say weird, but it's just it makes things really challenging. And so when Lego as a company has a policy about not building war machines or war-based things or influenced things, it's funny when we get themes like these because it's just right under the surface. And so ultimately it raises the question that we're presenting today, which is Lego breaking its own rule? To what extent are they breaking the rule? And it just opens up a really interesting dialogue. And so I think that's what we hope to jump into today.
Yeah, so kind of the history here with the Lego brand is, right, they were established before World War II, but the modern day brick system came out after that time period. Europe was, tarnished by another world war. The founder of Lego did not want kids playing with tanks and military vehicles, guns. So, famously, the first Lego colors were white, red, blue, and yellow. And there was no gray until 10 years later, sort of thing. And so it's funny, though, because one of those first sets was a yellow castle. And it's like, okay, so we recognize
Medieval
that we wanted
Wars,
to build a castle. Yeah. And I could defend it. Like, a castle's used for defense, right? I mean, it's not...
And
you
it's
can't,
history, right? There's enough time.
Right. You don't attack somebody with a castle. but it did include things like knights, so that's kind of action forward, right? More kinetic energy than potential energy. But that castle was famously in yellow. But I think the interesting, it's been talked about forever, right? But the interesting takeaway there is already that early in Lego's history were they kind of flirting with this line of, okay, how do we implement this ideological philosophy of not supporting military style sets?
Yeah. And let's bring some important context too, right? This is the 1950s, it's Europe. So like you mentioned, after the World War II, Europe was decimated, destroyed, and there was a lot of effort put into rebuilding cities and economies in Europe after the war. And a lot of the emphasis was on trying to ensure that something like World War II would never happen again. But right as that was occurring, we entered into the period of time that we look back on now and call the Cold War, which involved the nuclearization of the United States, the nuclearization of the Soviet Union, and now this threat that the Soviet Union was sort of actively trying to carve up portions of Europe to sort of provide a protective layer between Russia and the rest of the West, if you will. And so we saw places like Germany being split in half, right? There was East and there was West Germany. And cities like Berlin, the capital, even got split in half. Berlin is actually in what was East Germany, but the city itself got split in half between East and West. So there was a West Berlin and an East Berlin. And you had this whole sort of, they called it the Iron Curtain, right? Dropping over Europe at the time. And so not only were Europeans of the 1950s and 60s actively trying to prevent what occurred in World War II and recover from really decades of trauma and experiences there revolving around war, but then you also had the threat of nuclear war looming over everybody constantly. So I think it's important to share that, to emphasize that this isn't just like some, hippy dippy peace, mongering going on in Denmark per se. Not that that's necessarily a problem, but that this was just the real aftermath and ramifications of, once in a lifetime, millennia level of war and experience that had just completely like destroyed Europe. And there's ramifications for that today that we're still seeing. You can largely connect Russia's invasion of Ukraine recently as a follow-on for the history that we're talking about now, right? Like it's all connected is what I'm getting at. So again, I think for maybe the outsider who isn't aware of what it's like to be living on a continent where they've never had, or where every few years people are fighting, the fact that after World War II, everyone is kind of like, hey, we need to stop and really, think about this again. It totally makes sense for a children's toy company to take a stance like, hey, maybe we don't want to get anywhere close to children building machines of war, of modern war, for example. So,
well, and so we talked about the castle, right, and how maybe it's more historical based, right, and that's I think where you see Lego kind of take this first rendition of blurred lines here with Lego sets. So specifically, Pirates came out next, right, and this actually really triggered a lot of fans because it was I don't want to say triggered, I wasn't alive back then, but it did something enough that it made Lego have to make a statement on it, right? So that's what we know is Lego felt uncomfortable enough with it that they made a statement. And the reason they did it is because while we had some medieval weaponry, swords, knives, etc., we got pistols. Flintlock pistols. And it's funny because back then, of course, you're thinking, this was 100 years ago. But today, in today's day and age, like at what point does a World War at what point does a Tiger tank or a Sherman become? Well, it was 100 years ago. It's historical. I mean, World War II is 80 years ago now, right? So
we're getting close. Yeah,
we're getting kind of close. So Pirates brought us a lot of stuff, right? Sails, the first non-plain minifigure smile, right? The 2 dots and the quarter circle. You had stuff like facial hair prints, et cetera, et cetera. So it really revolutionized the space in a way that we would probably take for granted today, but it did bring pistols. And so cannons. Wes, this was an official statement from Lego on Lego Pirates. The Lego group believes that conflict between good and evil can form an important part of children's play as it teaches children about their own and other people's aggression and helps them recognize and handle disputes in other situations. However, the Lego group has no intention of glorifying war or encouraging violence, and therefore refuses to produce realistic weapons and military equipment with the risk of children recognizing these types of weapons from hostilities around the world. Instead, the Lego group supports children, stimulating their imagination by launching only historical and fantasy weapons. The Pirates theme is the first to feature firearms such as the flintlock pistol, muskets, and cannons. These historical weapons correspond well to the mentioned guideline concerning conflicts and weapons. So 2 things. The mentioned guideline. So there is this, while it doesn't live on Lego's page today, there is clearly an official statement that says they have their own guideline on this, and this is what the guideline is. And second of all, the line is, fantasy is okay.
Historical, right?
Historical and fantasy. Yep.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is the statement there that says, the risk of children recognizing these type of weapons from hostilities around the world. It's the 1950s, 60s. The risks of recognizing weapons from around the world. We're talking about early machine guns, stuff like that, right? So clearly, Lego is sort of drawing a, pun intended here, line in the sand of like, hey, a historical flintlock rifle is okay, but a modern looking rifle with like a bayonet on it is not okay, or a machine gun not okay. So I mean, based off of this statement, it makes sense to me. It makes sense for them to clarify it, but I also understand the logic here of what they're saying.
Yeah, and it's kind of like it's unethical to rob a bank, so therefore the Lego group won't encourage anybody to rob a bank. However, we do recognize that there's some children without any money that will die if we don't give them money. So it's okay if we do steal something and give it to those children. That's the fun thing about ethics, right? Like what's worse? Is it not encouraging kids to explore feelings of aggression that they're going to explore and teaching them in a safe way to kind of feel those feelings, or just shunning it all together and saying, you're wrong, you're terrible for thinking about that, we won't support that at all. So I do like it. I'm bringing this up because I think the natural response is, well, you either do it or you don't, but nothing is that simple, right? And so I like this idea of kind of teaching and training through play, because with a lot of, even child psychology, they use play, right? If you want to kind of have a conversation with a child, sometimes you have to kind of have them play with toys in order to kind of get them to start talking and get them to be comfortable and get them to feel these sort of things. So there certainly is a avenue and product here that could help a child explore some of these things.
When it's not like something like Pirates isn't exclusive to a specific region. Piracy is something that occurs all around the world. And so when we talk about pirates as a theme, I think it's more universal than like just a specific war theme would be. And so I don't think Lego, again, is like maybe putting a kid in a situation where they're, building a set based off of a conflict that they just survived or something like that. You know what I mean? I mean, obviously, piracy still, even today, affects people all over the world. But, you're not looking at like a Lego pirate set and you're like, man, that guy looks just like the dude who robbed me last week. So I think, again, if the intention here is not to put children in a position where the Lego set is invoking themes of war that they've just experienced, I think Lego is right on track with what it's trying to do. And your point too of it not being binary, I think is really important. There is a difference between making gray Lego pieces and making like an M16 set, buildable M16 set. People might do that on their own. Lego can't really control that. And I think that's probably where what kind of entered into their mindset when they shifted making yellow castles into gray castles is like, we can't control what kids build on their own. Right. So, for our own sake of authenticity and building the best model that we can, we need to introduce certain things that allow us to get there. What people do afterwards is kind of on them and their own sort of creativity. And that's why I think you see Lego still kind of tolerate a lot of that discussion today.
Yeah, and it's funny, we've talked about accuracy in Lego, and even that can be a bit of a fine line sometime, right? Because in this instance, thinking back to classic pirates, this is like pirates never walked the plank. They never said, "Our matey," they were privateers that were sponsored in many cases by other countries to go rob other countries' vessels in the Caribbean. Like that was kind of like England paid these like Sir Francis Drake. You may have learned that he was an explorer, but he was a pirate. He was privateered to go, and they essentially gave him a license to steal. Like as long as you were doing it for the crown, it was cool. You could not. And then they kind of started banding up together, and you actually had like bands of pirates that were living in like Tortuga and stuff, etc. But none of them said R. None of them had an eye patch or a parrot or a little monkey that ran around with them, and they didn't make you walk the plank into a tornado of sharks down below. Like that, a lot of that kind of pirate culture was derived from Treasure Island. And so in this case, you don't really have a super accurate pirate set when it comes to the source material. So it does really track with this kind of flirtatious line of, well, it's historical fantasy, right? It's not historical accuracy, because that would be kind of a weird Lego set to create.
I mean, even some of the, I wouldn't say early castle stuff, but the 80s and 90s castle stuff featured things like dragons and wizards, and so there's more of like an homage to like King Arthur and Camelot, and less of an homage to like, here's Joan of Arc, on a spit getting burned by so the sort of the medieval stuff that they did was a lot less realistic and more just sort of generalized medieval fantasy. And so I think that's absolutely right, Grinch, and that fine line between fantasy and reality is something that you see Lego start to flirt with, but at the same time too, I think they're staying on the sort of correct side of things.
Which is why it's funny when you have something like the Lion's Night Castle, and somebody, some internet dweller may be upset because there's a queen and not a king, and there's women archers, but there's also a wizard. Well, it wasn't accurate at the time. Women wouldn't fight. Well, there was also not wizards. So if we want to start nitpicking here, we can let's nitpick. But I think what I was trying to applaud with Lego too is it's kind of the joke in The Office, right? And I was looking at the exact quote where one of the characters says, ethics. It's not. I'm not doing anything wrong because it's not like I'm stealing bread from my family. And somebody jumps in and they say, no, the point of ethics is not whether or not the stealing of the bread is wrong. It's whether or not supporting your starving family is wrong. And I think kind of Lego's taken that approach here of, it's not about just weapons and violence. It's about how you engage in that, and can you make it productive play, and play that is going to occur, versus something that is encouraging it, maybe romanticizing it, and elevating it to a presence of tanks are so cool, blowing stuff up is cool. It's more about, hey, the bad guys are coming, they're going to attack us. That makes me feel sad. I don't want to do that. I feel like I have to defend myself, and you're exploring some of these more nuanced emotions.
And but it's important to note too that like these conflicts aren't necessarily being resolved in words, right? Like the Lion Knight's castle, you're not resolving the conflict there by everybody, putting their weapons down and sitting down and talking about, their feelings and negotiations and whatnot. So there's still a degree of aggression and violence occurring inherently in the subject matter, right? Like the pirates aren't like, just showing up and saying like, hey, please give us your ship, right? They're forcibly requesting the plunder, if you will, through the use of coercive techniques, backed up by the presence of weaponry, right? So like there's still a threat of violence looming over the entire situation. But I think that's something important to acknowledge too, which is like young children, especially young boys, whether we call it cops and robbers, cowboys versus Indians, like there's always some sort of struggle that is going to be played out amongst children. And you can choose to either be a part of that conversation or you can, choose to not. And I think, again, right, this is the nuance. Lego saying we still want to be a part of that conversation, but we don't want to do it in a way that represents something that just occurred 10 years, 15 years ago. We want to do so in a way that everyone can kind of acknowledge is maybe not realistic, right? So I think that's an important distinction to make.
So Lego's obviously evolved, right? And a more recent update from them, from a progress report. And I think it's more of a report on like progress in Lego than just a progress report. But specifically, they call out here the guidelines for weapons and conflict in Lego experiences. I'm going to read this again verbatim. So this is a direct quote from Lego. A large number of Lego minifigures use weapons and are assumably regularly being charged by each other's weapons as part of children's role play. In the Lego group, we acknowledge that conflict in play is especially prevalent among 4 to 9-year-old boys. An inner drive and a need to experiment with their own aggressive feelings in order to learn about other people's aggressions exist in most children. This, in turn, enables them to handle and recognize conflict in non-play scenarios. As such, LEGO Group sees conflict in play as a perfectly acceptable and integral part of children's development. We also acknowledge children's well-proven ability to tell play from reality. However, to make sure to maintain the right balance between play and conflict, we had adhered to a set of unwritten rules for several years. In 2010, we formalized these rules in a guideline for the use of conflict and weapons in LEGO products. This basic aim is to avoid realistic weapons and military equipment that children may recognize from hotspots around the world, and to refrain from showing violent or frightening situations when communicating about LEGO products. At the same time, the purpose is for the LEGO brand to not be associated with issues that glorify conflicts and unethical or harmful behavior. We have a strict policy regarding military models, and therefore we do not produce tanks, helicopters, etc., but we always support the men and women who serve their country. We prefer to keep the play experiences we provide for children in the realm of fantasy.
Yeah.
So again, just really hitting on this, exploring emotions, but not glorifying realism when it comes to violence.
Yeah. And it's funny because this continues to sort of crop up over time, but the things that I wanted to call out from that statement, and that was actually the first time that I'd heard you read it and in our notes, the first time I kind of put eyes on that. So everything we already talked about, right? We said, hey, young kids are going to play this way. So it totally makes sense for LEGO to engage in that discussion because that's just a natural form of play, especially for young boys. And it allows them to explore things like conflict, resolution. At the same time, imagine if LEGO were to make military equipment for, whatever case may be. Let's use a historical example, but a kind of more modern example. Let's say LEGO was making, U.S. military equipment from the Vietnam conflict war era in the U.S.'s history. So like mid 1960s to mid 1970s. How would a child in Vietnam feel about, a LEGO set with an American, B-52 or something like that just a few years earlier was actively flying overhead
with
and
the village destroying play feature?
Yeah, I mean,
drop the bomb and click the lever and the roof of the village flies off. Like, that'd be terrible.
Right. This is just bad business for LEGO. If they were to engage in that, right, they're automatically isolating. Let's take it just from a business lens perspective before we talk about like a child psychology lens. Like, the business lens of this is like terrible business. You're automatically isolating an entire market of people who you could be selling stuff to, who now that you've sort of taken a stance, whether it's overt or not, Lego, by building a American B-52, is showing everybody that it to some extent sides with the United States on how that conflict resolved, or how it started, or whatever the case may be. Right? It's them picking a side, and it shows Lego, actively, again, right? Like, you're isolating potential sales, so not a great business, strategy. Now let's talk about child psychology. Let's talk about the fact that you could have a child who's sitting there seeing something, right? Actively reminding them of maybe a terrible situation that occurred in their life. And now, again, going back to sort of both business, but also just putting that child in a really bad headspace. Like, this doesn't really make sense. And for Lego to be a company that is, not necessarily all about child well-being, right? But they're a toy company, so that sort of comes with the territory. It's just a bad strategy to do that. So I think that makes a lot of sense in the both sort of a modern context and a historical context. And maybe that's gives us some answers to some sort of looming questions we'll talk about a little bit later. But have there been any other... Oh, yeah. Sorry, Grinch. Go ahead.
I don't want to get us sidetracked, but I'd like to point out too. You see this echo in other toys as well, right? I think of G.I. Joe and Hasbro, right? Like, the soldiers that they produce, well, they've got camo and are realistic. They're still not like super customizable like Lego. Like, you can't take one apart and make a brand new thing. You can do that with Lego. So what you see in like a G.I. Joe is, yes, well, maybe they have a gun or something like that. It's a little bit more fantastical, right? You've got Cobra Kai as the villain here. You're not fighting, the USSR or something like that. And there's certainly inspiration. Don't get me wrong, but it's less. It's more narratively driven. With Lego, the risk that they have is that you can totally take something apart and you can build whatever you want. And you see that. Yep. You do see people build whatever they want. And so Lego wants to make sure they're not encouraging you to do that. Whereas somebody like Call of Duty, well, that's rated M, and that's not supposed to be for kids. So it is certainly a fine line. And you see this pop up every once in a while, right? You see a CNN article just a few years ago. A spokesperson from Lego said, "We have a long-standing policy not creating sets with feature real military vehicles and are currently in use." So, West, I think we've set up the conversation. we have a history of the world here. So why is this DC-3 a little strange? I know you kind of set it up at the beginning, but what specifically about the DC-3 kind of had you be like, ooh, interesting?
Yeah, and I want to touch on that CNN article real quick, because that was in response to the Osprey, and that was Lego partnering with Bell Boeing at the time to release a Technic version of the V-22 Osprey tilt rotor aircraft. The one Lego was releasing was done in a search and rescue scheme, and so there was very clear search and rescue stickers on it. There was very clear, use of bright orange, which is, generally done in a way to denote that this is a civilian search and rescue. Orange is always sort of associated with search and rescue because it's easily visible. So things like the Coast Guard, life rings, stuff like that, inflatable lifeboats, lifeboats in general. If you go on like a cruise ship, they're always done in a bright orange. Right, that color is really important. Not only does it stand out, but it denotes, A, something's kind of wrong, and B, you're there to, get some help. So Lego had done that, and it was sort of widely criticized as, hey, this aircraft is not actually used in that way. There's no active examples of it being in this situation, and this was, as you mentioned, their response to that. So you asked the question, though, of why does that DC-3 stand out to me? And it stands out to me because not only was the DC-3 used for commercial aviation, and it had a long history. In fact, you can still fly on them today, which is incredible. This airplane is almost a century old, 100 years old, and it's still being used all around the world to move people and equipment around, including in some really remote places in both the Arctic and Antarctic, by, again, countries from all over the world. So it's a very prolific airplane. This airplane was also used fairly heavily in military service. So the military designation for this aircraft was the C-47 Dakota. And most famously, it was used to drop paratroopers over Normandy in preparation for D-Day. But in the Vietnam War, it was also converted into one of the first airborne gunships. And so when this airplane came out, the thing that sort of popped in my mind was, with a few color swaps here, I have a DC-3 that looks like it went and flew over Normandy. With a few color swaps and piece swaps, I've turned my DC-3 into an AC-47 gunship that flew over Vietnam. And it brought up that conversation that we talked about in the beginning of the challenge with something like aviation, which I applaud LEGO for exploring this. And I as a fan of aviation in general, I think these are some awesome sets. It's just really weird because there's such a fine line with aviation between civilian use and military use that you kind of can't really get away from it. I will say, in the course of our conversation, understanding their guidelines better, I still totally see how LEGO is, sticking to their guns here, pun intended, I suppose, of this is a civilian machine that was depicted as
fantasy
a civilian.
Guns, sticking to their fantasy guns, laser blasters.
Right. I can see how they could produce this without feeling like it, exceeds their own internal guidelines. But I guess the ice is thin, I suppose. And that's sort of the interesting thing here with a set like this, which is that, I'm sure a lot of people will modify this and recolor it in such a way that it looks like a military aircraft instead of a civilian one. So, and it's not, not much needs to get done to do that. So.
Well, we don't have any Lego gray, so. Oh wait. But I think
and dark green.
So what's the difference then between this and the Osprey? Is it because somebody challenged the Osprey, or is it because there was that peace group, right? That European peace group, I forget what they were called, that actually challenged and said, "Hey, what the heck?" But is it also because the Osprey was the first intention, and I think we could probably say 95% of the use of the Osprey is as a military vehicle, whereas the DC-3 in this case, this is a branded Pan Am set, right? It's to honor kind of that original passenger aircraft transportation,
an icon of aviation,
right, more so than well, it was a military vehicle. However, we're gonna put orange on the end of the planes, and we're gonna call it a fire and rescue DC-3.
No, I mean, so this is a great question, Grinch, and one that's important, right? The historical context again is such that the DC-3 came out before World War II, so it was always first a civilian airplane, or at least had a relatively long, but it had civilian service before it saw military service. So that's an important distinction to make. The Osprey, on the other hand, there, at least to my knowledge, has never been one produced for civilian use. If you did have one produced, wow, that would just be incredibly expensive to operate. So it's only ever been produced as a military vehicle. And so I think the peace group's point here, and why they probably protested it, was, yes, you are showing it as a civilian vehicle, but there's no example of that ever. So if, again, taking LEGO's own perspective here, if you're a child who unfortunately grew up in a conflict zone where maybe one of these flew, and you see it in civilian colors, you're not going to recognize it as a civilian thing. It's going to feel like it's a military piece of equipment. Another decent example that would sort of blur the lines here would be like a C-130 transport aircraft. While they are largely military made, they do sell them to people as a civilian aircraft. It's called the L-100. Not a lot of people buy them as civilian aircraft directly from Lockheed Martin, but it is produced in such a capacity that would be a weird in between case of like the DC-3, which was a civilian plane first and then became a military plane. Whereas like this was a military plane that then became a civilian plane. There are examples of civilians who operate these aircraft. They use them for like firefighting and cargo and airlift. And then the Osprey that has only ever been used for the military and never been used for civilian sides of things. But again, right, it just sets up this really interesting case, right? Combat search and rescue are two very similar things. A lot of the same procedures and techniques are used in both regular search and rescue and combat search and rescue. It's just in one situation you're at war and the other one you're not, right? But you're still protecting and saving people. And so this is, again, the really interesting nuance that occurs when we talk about something like this of, a rescue helicopter can be a combat rescue helicopter with a simple change of paint and, some new equipment on board. But the line is a lot finer than I think people appreciate sometimes.
So I think just like our ethics conversation, right? I think that's why, that was our longest podcast ever. We had to split these up. we had to. We'd still be yapping if that were the case. I get it's a fine line. It's nuanced, right? Our goal was in that conversation was not our goal was to have you come to your own conclusion as a listener. We have that example. There's two examples I want to cover, West, and it's really important to note that these are official Lego sets that were released. In the case of the Osprey, the decision was made to not release that set. In the case of these sets, they were released. Number one, let's talk about our good friend, the Red Baron, set 100241. West, the Red Baron, and I believe this is a real person, right? And his name is Manfred von Richthofen. And I may have said that wrong. My bad. I'm American. He had 80 confirmed aerial victories, and he was the top scoring ace of World War I. He was known for killing the most people in the air. And we have a set, again, set number 10024, that is literally called the Red Baron. And on top of all of that, it features an official Lego sticker of, drumroll please, the Iron Cross of World War I, which was the primary German military award for bravery, and it was instituted by Kaiser Wilhelm in 1914. And so,
the Iron Cross is still the
if
symbol.
the line is fine, this is an 8-lane interstate in California.
You're absolutely right. And I wanted to point out that Iron Cross symbol is actually still in use today by the German Luftwaffe, which it's still called the Luftwaffe, interestingly enough. And
which is the German Air Force, right?
Yes, the German Air Force.
This is an official print of the German Air Force symbol.
Like the Iron Cross, yeah, absolutely. And was used on Nazi aircraft too in World War II. In conjunction with the swastika, the Iron Cross was another symbol used to kind of denote. We in the Sopwith Camel and on other aircraft, you call that either like the tail flash or the roundel. And so you see different versions of that for like France, the UK, the United States, but for Germany, it was the Iron Cross is what they painted on their planes. Grinch, you bring up a really great point. And this is where, if there is a line and if that line has sometimes gotten blurred, this feels like Lego probably stepping over the line, I would say.
And then stomped on it and like, smushed their foot into the ground and then took it to a curb and curb stomped. And it's
interesting because we've not only have we, so that was not the first model. The first model that came out was a Sopwith Camel. Then we got the Red Baron, and then we actually got a reissue of the Sopwith Camel a few years later. A much better model, in my opinion, than the original one that I have. And you actually have the Red Baron, or I suppose I have it in my.
I've got it. I actually ordered a new sticker sheet. I've got the officially printed Lego German I'm gonna build it as soon as I get everything back.
We have, or the point here is, right, like, not only did they engage in this once, they've actually done it 3 times, which over a significant period of time, which tells us that it wasn't like some internal debate that one person won once. They've at least won it 2 to 3 times, that Lego has said, like, yep, we're good with this one. So now they have not touched that theme since then. This was early creator theme, which I think was trying to design models geared for adults, right? So I think that's an important caveat here. Where I still think this is sort of acceptable is there's no child alive today who would see the Red Baron, and I'm going to make a sort of a joke here. So, but this isn't a joking matter. It's not going to induce like an episode of PTSD for a 10-year-old seeing the Red Baron model on a shelf somewhere. And I think that's, again, if I'm reading Lego's guidelines correctly, that's the thing they're trying to avoid. And so I think if you consider just that sort of one specific example, I think Lego's still probably in the clear. But man, oh man, is it so blurry and so, crazy that like they're literally war machines, and real war machines, right? Like, you can't even sit there and say, well, it was a made up, war machine, or it was Star Wars, so like it's not a real war or whatever. So yeah, I mean, how do you square that?
I'm going to take the opposite approach. I think Lego missed this. I think this is inappropriate even to today. I mean, the Red Baron is it is a person.
Yeah.
It's a person. And maybe there's a bit of a different sentiment between World War I and World War II. Like, Adolf Hitler was a person. Like, what if they came out with and I know this is an extreme example, but the point is to kind of help like emphasize the point here, like, of the fact that this is a person who is literally famous for killing the most people in the air in World War II. Like, what if they came out with a set that was just called Adolf Hitler?
Yeah, the Joseph Stalin buildable minifigure.
Yeah, like, so in the case of like the Sopwith Camel, that was what that plane was called, right? And in this instance, this actual plane, like, they called the plane the Red Baron, right? But the name of the plane, the model, was something different, right?
Yeah, so it was based off of the Fokker DR-1 triplane that was produced during World War I.
I would give you that had they had named it that. But in this instance, the imagination, the exploratory, the play is, I'm the Red Baron.
Yeah.
Add a tally to the panel, like, and so the where I see a little bit more of a blurred line is with, you can't put a minifigure in this.
Yeah.
Also with the Sopwith Camel, you can't. I have this model. It falls apart. Like, if you look at it, it is not swooshable. It was really designed to sit on a shelf. And I don't think that was Lego's necessarily intention. Like, they weren't like, we wouldn't do this if it were more sturdy, because then people could play with it. So let's design it so that it falls apart real easily. So that if you do, it's going to fall apart in there. Like, that could, no. In no way was that the intention.
But again, I think an important caveat: it was built more towards an adult collector than a child. Right? Now, we got them as children because we liked airplanes.
How old was I when I got mine? Let's see. It came out in 2002. I was 9.
Yeah. But, and again, right, like, an important note, it came out after the Sopwith Camel, so they had already built a World War I warplane first on one side of the conflict. So you could sort of see them acknowledging, like, okay, let's build one on the other side of the conflict. Not so that they could be like, have their own little dogfight or whatever, but just to not pick a side. I don't know, right? Like, was this a course correction for them or something? Like, it's just kind of weird to think about, how they rationalized it.
Yeah. So, historically, then I'm looking forward to my new Mitsubishi's A6M Japanese Zero kamikaze plane to just live the long history of Japanese fighters in World War II.
Yeah. I mean, it's again, it brings up an interesting case. I wanted to point to other themes too, even around the same time though, that we're engaging in that. Specifically, the one that I think of is like Johnny Thunder, which featured what looks like a Newport biplane in their Johnny Thunder Egypt series. And I think that again, kind of, what do you think about that, Grinch?
Here's what I'm picking up. I stand by this, that the Red Baron is inappropriate. Yeah. But where I will say there is this consistency is with what you're mentioning. And I'm going to I said there was 2 examples. I've got one more coming, but I'll preface it with this. To your point, and the history we've discussed today has been around World War II. That's what kicked off this sentiment with the Lego group, right? So
we can assume, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, they've said in interviews it was they originated in World War II. Like literally, they were just invaded and taken over. They did not want kids to do that, right? The World War I at that point was historical. So if they had this, lined in the sand, for them, it's more World War II. And where you see that is in the case like Johnny Thunder, where it's more of this 30s, early 40s style, maybe even going into the 40s, but the technology was invented 20 years 30s, earlier, right?
Right.
Yeah. Right. So I think that's maybe the line, had guns, right, in the sand, guns,
right?
Yes, they had a revolver, an old pistol, right? But again, just like the flintlock, really not kind of well, revolvers still exist today. So do flintlocks. They're just an obsolete. You have them because they're a historical piece of technology, more so than you're not using it in self-defense, or you're not invading a country using a flintlock pistol, or not having a lot of success.
Not very well. Yeah.
Where it's interesting is with Indiana Jones. It's based off of a source material. Famously, there's a couple of sets from the Raiders of the Lost Ark. If anybody has seen that movie, you know that the Raiders of the Lost Ark, the antagonist is the Nazis.
Yeah.
And Lego came out with, it was 3 sets, I think. One set had German soldier number 1, German soldier number 2, and German soldier number 3. The other set had German soldier number 4 and German soldier number 5 in the last set, which was the pilot.
Yeah.
Now, they did not call it Nazi soldier. They called it German soldier, which honestly, if I was Germany, I would be like, screw you guys. Like, that's not like, we didn't like get our name out of that. call a villain one for all we care about. But it is indisputable that minifigure is based off of a Nazi soldier.
One, and let's talk about that a little bit more too, right? Because yeah, absolutely, they're Nazis. Let's just call a spade, right? They also came out with the set based off of the airplane from the Raiders of the Lost Ark, which famously in the movie had a giant swastika on it. Now the Lego set obviously did not have a swastika on it. Lego does have some restraint apparently when it comes to depicting historical stuff like that, but it was now that was a fictional airplane even in Indiana Jones. So I'm again, you could sort of see somebody in Denmark here like acknowledging like, man, we are like on very thin ice, but like the ice is still holding, right? Like it wasn't a real Nazi aircraft. And
there's an email out there of this person defending this decision, and I'm really curious to see what's on there.
Yeah, right. Like an internal email, like some lawyer who's like, well,
yep. Their legal team reviewed this, and I would really like to see the notes.
Yeah. But I mean, again, right? Like it still stands. The latest Indiana Jones release that came out 3 years ago had a scene from the Last Crusade movie that it featured a German airplane chasing down.
That's German
Indiana's
soldier number
dead.
5 on Brick Lake. I actually, I'm so happy you brought that up because I wanted to. It's actually incredibly interesting because in the case of Indiana Jones, these sets came out in 2006, right? And you could argue, well, it was really kind of their second foray into like a major license theme. They had done Star Wars. They were maybe trying to test the water, which like how would people react? And I don't think it wasn't controversial. Maybe I think they sold well. I think there was a lot of sentiment here. It's a beloved theme, right? Nobody sits here and says, I'm not going to collect Lego anymore because they did Indiana Jones. But what's really interesting about all of this is they came out with 4 sets. 3 made it to the retail shelf. One of the sets was the Ark Temple, a remake. The next set was also a remake of the tomb from the Raiders of the Lost Ark. The third set was a remake of the plane scene in The Last Crusade, which features German soldier number 5. So they went the same exact route 20 years later.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the one set that was canceled was the Temple of the Doom, which was also a remake. So Lego's revisited this themselves, right? Like you said, we got another stop with Camel. They did not do another Red Baron, so I think that's maybe even them addressing, this whole like internet thing's a little bit more popular, and this is going to spread like wildfire if we do this. It's maybe not
right.
Good.
Maybe. I mean, they still gave us a stop with Camel though, so like they still gave us another War Machine. So like the fact that like they're like, oh wait, Red Baron was a step too far. Like, I don't know, you already gave us one. Like,
but it's interesting that with the Indiana Jones, the reason, the suspected reason, because they've never officially said, was like, Disney stepped in. They don't love the Temple of Doom. There's been a little bit of backlash over it as, representation of indigenous people, white savior sort of thing. Got it. Get it.
Yeah.
I think they argue too.
Indiana Jones,
right. I mean, they argue that it was a creepy scene because the guy sticks his hand in the chest and pulls out a heart. Like,
Temple of Doom was if there was a problematic Indiana Jones movie, Temple of Doom is your first stop in sort of problematic themes.
But
yeah,
sorry, that's my favorite part. but they were planning on coming out with it. They didn't pull this set because of German Soldier number 5. So it's interesting that there's a line somewhere. It's out there. It's next to the Holy Grail. Somewhere probably in Jerusalem. Nobody knows where it is. Wars will be fought over it one day. But
Lego knows. They're just not telling you.
Yeah, Lego knows. But it seems like German Soldier number 5 is still on the right side of that line.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is an appropriate time to bring up Avatar, right? Which is, we got the Colonel Quaritch minifigure, who, again, in Avatar, in the universe, he's playing a Marine colonel, but the camouflage pattern that he has on largely resembles the modern United States Marine Corps camouflage pattern. Obviously, it's changed for the movie and it's updated and it's the future, so like there's some differences. But the minifigure that came out is probably the closest thing we're going to get to like a Marine wearing combat fatigues ever. And again, you want to talk about a blurred line, even if we kind of talk about that perspective of like, we don't want to induce, a bad memory and for a child, that minifigure is probably the closest thing we have to, potentially putting somebody in that situation. If you separate it from the rest of the set, it looks like a Marine. It doesn't look like a minifigure from the movie Avatar per se.
And I'm sorry, West. It's the Resource Development Administration.
Oh, right, okay? Right.
They're just called Colonial Marines in the show and just say "hua" and are heavily influenced, or "hoorah," whatever like they say, and they're heavily culturally influenced by the U.S. Marine Corps. But it's not. It's a Resource Development Administration Security Marine. So let's just please, come on. It's a German soldier number 5.
Yeah, I mean, dude, look at, just for anyone who's watching, right? Like, what an image there. So it looks like something from Brick Arms or a third party Lego retailer, not necessarily a Lego set itself. So
I think there's some other examples too, but I think the line is more clear, right? When you talk Star Wars, yes, fantasy, fictional, you've got aliens, spaceships. Like as a child, that's not realistic. It's you tell your friends, well, theoretically Star Wars could have existed, and if it did, it actually existed light years away, so that we would just be finding out about it now, and they are like a billion years advanced. Like, but it's
But
like,
again,
it's fake.
Yeah, and it's important to note, right? Like Star Wars isn't overly stylized, and the original trilogy was not really nuanced at all. There was nuance in maybe the influences, right? The Empire was both heavily influenced by Nazi Germany, like visually, right? Like Darth Vader's helmet, famously resembles the helmet that German SS soldiers wore. I don't think the name for stormtroopers came from Germany. In fact, a lot of their weapons the stormtroopers had were repurposed German machine guns and stuff that they kind of added stuff onto to make them look futuristic. But that was all sort of heavily influenced. Now, the interesting thing was George Lucas has stated publicly that the Empire also he thought was sort of the United States during the Vietnam War, and that the rebels were kind of like the Viet Cong, if you will. Reflecting kind of that issue in the United States at the time, which was there was a large group of people who did not agree with what was going on, right? Again, though, if you take Lego's barometer test, let's call it, and you show a stormtrooper to a child in Vietnam, who was a child of product of the Vietnam War, they're not going to be hit with flashbacks of like what occurred, right? So Star Wars, I think, like you mentioned, very much stays on the correct side of this litmus test as appropriate, because just like Pirates, just like Castle, it's a fantasy representation of a storyline where there's an inherent good and evil. There's not a lot of nuance there. The Empire's bad. The rebels are good. End of the story, right? Now, Star Wars more recently has engaged in some interesting discussions of like, not necessarily the Empire wasn't bad, but things like Andor and stuff have kind of painted them maybe in more sympathetic lights to some extent of like, there are people too, right, who are caught up in something. They've also sort of explored nuance of like the rebels of like, yeah, they kind of had to do bad stuff too, right? So, I mean, there's been some really interesting character study and development done in the series, but like Lego still is sort of paying homage to that original sort of dichotomy that was presented. So I think we're still good.
Ethics and morals are all about perspective, my friend. There's that
absolutely
funny meme out there that Luke Skywalker was a radicalized boy by an ancient religion that committed mass genocide by killing up billions of innocent people on the Death Star. But he's a hero in our book, so because we're on his team.
Yeah. I mean, in Andor, right? It was the really famous line where, oh man, I'm forgetting the character, but he was the one who helped build the Death Star, and he's talking to
Galen Erso.
Not Galen Erso, but the bad guy, who wore all white, Krennic. Right? Krennic is at a party on Coruscant, and he's debating with Mon Mothma, and he basically, says, "Hey, one person's freedom soldiers is another person's terrorist," and the line was sort of played for like quick quips and laughs, but like that reality isn't necessarily wrong, right? And like you mentioned, how you fall on that spectrum sort of depends on where you're at, right? So yes, it is nuanced. Grinch, what isn't nuanced though is James Bond. Where is the nuance here? And how are we okay with a buildable Aston Martin that has machine guns that pop out of it, and what we eventually get, which is a James Bond minifigure? Where do we see the litmus test on this one?
James Bond himself is a fictional character. Well, MI6 exists. If I'm thinking back to like, my stance again was that the Red Baron was inappropriate.
Yeah.
Because it's a real person.
Yeah.
James Bond is not. MI6 is, but James Bond is not. And whenever we get a James Bond set, it's the Aston Martin. We're getting an Aston Martin set, not a James Bond set. I mean, you know what I mean, though, right? It's Aston Martin from James Bond, but the focus.
I mean, the
it doesn't. It doesn't
set,
come with the Bond girl that you can hook up with at the end, and Jaws who's going to throw his hat. It doesn't come with all that stuff, right? It's a Speed Champion set celebrating the car, right? And then it has a James Bond minifigure, or it is with a larger wrench, buildable. Right? To make sure he fixes his tires, right, or it's a larger buildable creator car like the Aston Martin that doesn't fit a minifigure. So I think not only is James Bond fictional, but the car itself is a real brand in a fictional world and a fictional car.
Yeah, and I think that is, again, the nuance there, and the line I think is still intact. And I actually want to, for the record, say that I think the Red Baron is appropriate because it's so historical. Where I think, again, if your litmus test is like, are you going to induce a traumatic episode in a child who's going to, remember being attacked by the Red Baron? Like, that's just not going to happen in today's time and age. That would be my rationale. I totally understand yours. Again, James Bond is a fictional character, but that fictional character is based off of material that at best is PG-13 / maybe rated R, like a lot of heavy innuendo to, could be rated R, right? Like, he actively kills people. That's just he has a license to kill, right? Like a famous line in the movie. So like violence is inherent in the character in such a way that like it definitely, I don't know. I think it's still questionable at best, maybe. Right. Like, but I would agree. I think ultimately because he's a fictional character, Lego's probably still in the clear, but yeah, I don't know.
Well, and so, okay. I hear you on the Red Baron piece. And again, it's
and I'm not trying to change your mind. I'm not trying to change your mind.
No. I'm just going to ask you a question. If we got a Genghis Khan minifigure, would that be? I mean, it's further back than the Red Baron. He had the largest continuous empire in history. What about like a Napoleon Bonaparte minifigure? Like, would that be cool?
Yeah, I mean,
he was a military genius.
I don't think they would be in violation of Lego's stated internal guidelines. But also, like, unless they did like a whole series of like, historical military figures, right? Like, I don't know why we would get him, but point taken. And I get,
but we got the Red Baron, and he is only historically known. Like, at the Genghis Khan was an emperor,
format, right? Not a minifigure
format. But let's get Genghis Khan's horse then. Or his yurt. Like, enter the thing here, whatever you want to call it. It's Napoleon Bonaparte's horse, right? Because he's a famous story.
Okay, I'm going to raise you another sort of hypothetical here. What if we got one of those Greek naval vessels, and I forget the names of them, but, like the one with like the ram on the front of it, and that had like all the oars and had the sails or whatever. Like, I think that would be kind of a cool Lego set, to be honest.
Maybe we'll get it with the Odyssey. The Odyssey.
Oh, there you go.
It's a fictional book, right? Well, get a Homer minifigure. Yeah, see, and Achilles and Odysseus. Like, come on, that'd be cool. But that's fictional. That's how I think they do that. Also, that movie's coming out, so like, perfect time, Lego. Come on, hire us.
But like, would that be appropriate? You know what I mean? Like one of those Greek warships. Like, it's a real thing.
That's thousands of years ago versus like,
I mean, Genghis Khan, thousands of years ago.
Yeah, I'm saying I think Genghis Khan would be, I mean, if the Red Baron is, I'm saying Genghis Khan also is.
I would agree. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what I find interesting about this entire conversation is we spent the last part of it talking about the sets, but let's talk about the pieces, because, and if you don't think that's that important, just remember Lego famously did not have gray, and they stated the founder of Lego stated because he didn't want kids to build tanks after World War II. So it took them 10 years to come out with gray. When we look at Lego pieces, right, they say they won't create realistic weapons, right, or that are used today, right? That I think there's that little kind of corporate caveat there that remind people or correspond to the weapons of today.
Right.
And
I mean, you're not going to get like a Glock pistol on a minifigure, right?
Right. So we've got flintlocks, we got revolvers, etc.
We even have pistols, right? Like the Batman series famously, probably about 15 years ago, introduced a Tommy gun. They introduced kind of like a handheld, kind of like what looked like an Uzi at the time, right? Like they definitely were probably the most realistic weapons that we've ever gotten from Lego. Famously, here's a great example of where they kind of went back was the
Lone Ranger pistol.
Lone Ranger, right? The revolver that like was almost too realistic for Lego, which again, right? Like I think ultimately they were probably on the right side of things with, because it's like, they weren't like, this is the Colt and Wesson 44, revolver. Like they just were like, it's a, Western revolver. So like they weren't tying it to a specific thing. Right. But I think for
weirdly,
Lego,
I think that's more appropriate than like the Tommy gun or like that like wannabe Uzi they came out with. But like, so some recent, like those are minifigure accessories. So like just the pieces, right? We talked about Arctic a little bit ago. One of your favorite sets was the Explorer base, and that came with treads.
Yeah.
If you did not want to come out with gray
tanks
because people didn't want to make tanks, you came out with tank treads, and it's funny because myself
you built one.
You use those to literally build a tank. So, oops.
Yeah. I mean, again, right? Like this, I think all of these examples just show how much, ethics are never something that's set in stone, right? Because I can give you an example. You gave us an example earlier, from The Office of, right, like the hypothetical question of like, is stealing bread bad, right? And then someone says, yeah, well, if that's my only option and I have to feed my family, like what other choice do I have, right? Like, so the point here is like ethics are a living thing. And I think you see Lego as a company exploring, updating, modernizing, probing, right? Like finding the edge, sort of, not constantly, but it's a living thing. So like every once in a while we get something that we're just like, oh, that was pretty close, Lego, oh, you maybe crossed the line there, right? And you see things like the Osprey getting pulled. You see things like the Lone Ranger getting pulled. The Lone Ranger sort of famously also had the issue of Johnny Depp playing a Native American, which I think got a lot of backlash at the time, rightfully so. Not only with his depiction of Tonto, but the fact that he's not indigenous himself. And that probably also combined, and the movie just in general did terribly in theaters.
I think the movie also just was terrible.
And so, did the pistol get pulled because it was realistic, or did that just get pulled because the series, didn't do well, right? Like, and Lego's never revisited it. So that's an interesting question too. But
the other example I found too is from, and I think it's important to note these are discontinued. And like you said, ethics can change. And I think one of our listeners kind of challenged us last week on the ethics conversation about, it's not fair to kind of look at Lego like they didn't own Bricklink back then. They do now. Like, but it's important to remember stuff changed. Ironically, I actually think the Red Baron would be more appropriate today than 2002.
Sure.
If that set came out today, I don't think I'd be harping on it as hard as I am. But at the time, the stance was this was right as Lego went into Star Wars, right?
Yeah.
You would think the line would be a little more blurred over time, but in the sense of this was 25 years ago that they came out with that set. You're that much closer to World War II. You're that much closer. Yeah. The Iraq War just started. I guess the Afghanistan invasion just started at the time. So war was very much on the mind, right?
And a lot of Europe mobilized to support it. So it's not like Europe wasn't, isolated from and issues of terrorism occurring in Europe. in the early 2000s, right? Like, yes, obviously in the United States, we famously had the 9/11 attacks, but London was bombed. There were bombings that occurred all over Europe through the early 2000s in the name of terrorism. So it wasn't like they were immune or isolated from that either.
So it's one of those, like, as we've explored more IPs, they've stretched the limits a little bit. It would make more sense now, right? Because I think now you'd sit there,
sure,
like you're making the argument if it's a historical figure, it's okay. I don't disagree with that as much, but in the sense of back in 2002, I challenged that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Another area where I was kind of transitioning to was the minifigure, and this is the name of this, by the way. This is the Bricklink name. And if Bricklink doesn't matter, well, Lego does own them, so they can control this, number one. Number two, minifigure, weapon pack disc, grappler, grenade tips, 13 in a bag multi-pack. These were some packs that came out in some superhero sets in 2019 and 2020. Came out 6 sets total, according to Bricklink. Literally have what are grenades? I mean, they're grenades.
Yeah.
And they say tips, but like, if you just have somebody holding one of these,
it looks like they've got a grenade in their hand.
This is a grenade.
Yeah.
So, huh.
Again, right? Like, it just goes back to that like discussion. They weren't produced in large quantities. I think I ended up buying a Marvel set just so I could get my hands on a few of them, because you put them onto like one of those megaphone pieces, and now you've got like a grenade launcher or something, right? Like, there's just they look extraordinarily realistic for what they were. And yeah, I mean, how do you square that with the larger ethical discussion that we've been having here? I don't know if you can. Again, right? Like, they already did Dynamite for Cops and Robbers, right? Like, there's been portrayals,
and they've done Dynamite they had the printed tile too. I mean, that goes way back to Western sets.
Yeah, there's been portrayals of things being used as a bomb, ostensibly to harm people. So the presence of a grenade in this doesn't necessarily, I think, cross lines. But again, right, like, you're flirting with it for sure. And that's just not entirely clear. And again, right, let's use that litmus test that we've talked about of that child who grew up in a combat situation. That grenade actually might induce, bad memories. So
more so than like a Star Wars thermal, they have the printed thermal detonator, right?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
It looks like
or
a
the
thermal
blaster.
Yes, that's a grenade. But yeah, this is supposed to be a realistic grenade. I mean, you're supposed to put it on like one of the old stud shooters and shoot a rocket propelled grenade. Like, that's also known as an RPG. Fun fact. So
Grinch, I wanted to present a hypothetical, because this was something that I sort of left the conversation open with last year when I talked about the aviation series and kind of Lego's foray into realistic airplanes, and talked about some of those challenges and sort of bringing us full circle in our own conversation today. I would be curious. I think Lego, I'm not saying they will, and I'm not sort of suggesting this as like, I think this is what will be done next. But if Lego continues this Icons of Aviation, which I hope they do, like, could we see a NASA SR-71 Blackbird? They did fly for NASA for a long time. They also flew for the CIA and the Air Force. They were an unarmed aircraft, right? They were doing reconnaissance. But at one point, they literally flew for NASA and had NASA logos on the aircraft, and they were used for high altitude, weather, basically testing and stuff. And so, is that appropriate? Would that meet Lego's criterias? Yes or no? And then, I think that would be an awesome airplane for Lego to build. But I'm also a stan for those kind of things. So, I don't know. What do you think about that? And I guess, what do you think about the policy in general? Is it time for them to change, or could we revisit stuff maybe from World War II, or old warships, right? Like, we talked about, what are they going to do for the next sort of big ship series? We talked about, maybe an HMS Victory would be really cool, right? That was used in the kind of Napoleonic era of war fighting between England and France. Is that appropriate now? I don't know. Maybe not.
I think I'm sorry, what was the plane?
The
You're the plane guy.
SR-71.
The 71. Thank you. The SR-71. To your point, that was a NASA plane, right? Is used for stealth.
Not originally, but eventually. Yeah.
The more nuanced question would be like the B-2 Spirit, the stealth bomber that was designed for bombing and then used for stealth, right?
Well, it's never not been a bomber. So
the Red Baron has never not been the man that's known for killing the most people in the air in World War One.
Sure.
But I think that's where the 71 is, I think, a lot more defensible, right? Because it really is. It's known for stealth. Did it break the sound barrier or something too? Like it was super fast and stealthy.
Great question, right? Like the Bell X-1 is, the airplane that Chuck Yeager flew to break the sound barrier. He did so. It was an Air Force airplane. It said Air Force on the side, but it was not armed. Yeah. It was painted all orange, right? Like it was designed to be a test vehicle. It was never designed to be a military airplane. It was literally just built to break the sound barrier and did it. We have a Wright Brothers set, the first manned flight. Like, would having a, airplane that broke the sound barrier be wrong?
What about the B-29 Super Fortress bomber, also known as the Enola Gay?
Yeah, see, I would say no. Like hard no on that one, right? But because again,
to elaborate on the hard no, West.
Sure, there was no civilian variant of it, so it was never used in civilian service. So like it was only a military airplane. Also,
so right, what I hear though is the civilian aspect versus the military aspect, right?
Which again, though, right, like the Fokker and the Sopwith Camel never, like they fail that test, but. Something so like the Enola Gay.
It's not that then, right?
Associated.
If it's not because it was civilian or military.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah. To get your to
the Enola Gay
right?
dropped a nuclear bomb on Hiroshima and destroyed 70% of its buildings and killed hundreds of thousands of people.
Yes. So yeah, I would say largely inappropriate. But again, right? Like this is where things get
weird.
How do we
just say that?
Because the Tintin rocket, and I think I had mentioned this, right? And I'd found some reference to this, but the Tintin rocket itself was largely inspired by the German V2 rockets that rained down on London in World War II. Famously built by Werner von Braun, he helped, influence the designs, who ended up becoming a scientist for the United States after the war and helped us get into space, and build our own rockets. Right? Like we have the Saturn V. Well, the Saturn V was designed by somebody who at one point in their life worked for Nazi Germany. Like, how do you disconnect and where do you disconnect all of this stuff? Right? Is I think the interesting question here. And so when we get and the Tintin rocket, even with its colors, like V2 rockets were painted like that. So, I mean, they didn't have the like bulbous sort of bases on it that the Tintin rocket does, but you take those off and you have a German V2 rocket from World War II, like which just bombed London cities. It didn't even bomb military targets. It was just used for indiscriminate bombing as like a way to pressure London and Europe, the UK from joining the war or continuing the war, like just destruction. So like again, right? Like these are the interesting questions and the challenges that come with some of these things.
I think what you're going to have to do, West, is agree with me that the Red Baron was inappropriate because what you're saying right now is something like the SR-71 Blackbird. Well, it skirts this fine line. The design, the strategic intent behind it, even being created, unlike the Enola Gay, unlike the Osprey, unlike one Red Baron, was to be a strategic reconnaissance aircraft. That was the intent. The intent of those other vehicles was violence and destruction.
Yeah, but like we're okay with a pirate ship with cannons on the side? You know what I mean? Like, again, right? Like, this is where we built the Death Star in Lego. It destroyed a planet called Alderaan, right? Like,
I'm sorry, we don't refer to it as the Death Star anymore. We refer to it as the unaliving star. Thank you very much.
The point is, though, right? Like, wow, what an interesting. If we're charting like the path of this line here, it's like it's just kind of, it feels like all over the place. It's just interesting. It's a fun conversation because I think we can engage in these what ifs, and we can find examples of like where, you're like, well, what about the B-29? And I'm like, no, that would never pass, but then I was like, well, what about the SR-71? And we're like, oh, maybe, like, that one could do it, right? Like, and so it's just funny to find all these examples of, you're like, well, does this kind of meet the criteria, yes or no? And so, yeah, ultimately, Grinch, do you think like Lego's breaking their rule here, or do you think Lego is still kind of staying within the zones that they've, I hypothesize that maybe Lego hasn't been super public about this. Obviously, we've got instances of them commenting on it. So like there are examples of Lego sort of saying what their policy is. But even then, the policy itself is pretty vague. Is that on purpose? Right? Like,
there's an old saying, right? You can't define pornography, but I'll know it when I see it.
Sure.
And so I think with Lego,
not only was that a saying, that was the finding of a Supreme Court justice. So, an important legal argument he was making was that, like, hey, sometimes there are things that context and intent so heavily inform that, like, what is one person's nude sculpture we find appropriate, but then something like pornography we find inappropriate because of the larger context of how the nudity is occurring and what we're seeing, right? And so that's, to your point, right?
And how you're using the nudity, I suppose.
Right. Absolutely.
So, and I think that's what Legos, they've not shied away from this conversation, right? They've made multiple announcements. Practically every Lego documentary that you watch about the history of Lego, it's most AFOLs know they don't want you building tanks. Like that's fairly consistent. It's the very pathos and the reason why Lego does what they do, right? Behind the philosophy and how they build. And so I think to answer your question, it's and you have to remember, we're looking at this through our own mid 30-year-old male American adult bias. Somebody in Europe may look at these things very differently because Lockheed Martin is not a European manufacturer. They're based in the United States, right? Like they're a United States company. So they may look at it as a company of innovation rather than a company that was creating a plane to bomb stuff. You know what I mean? Like there's other nuances here other than the ones that we've introduced as like here's where we're interpreting the line. You got to even look as far as who's interpreting too. And I think it's important for us to recognize that. So I think, again, to quote the Supreme Court, it follows Lego's policy, and I'll know it when it doesn't. And the Bread Baron does not follow the policy.
I think that's a really great point. I'm going to leave two thoughts on the table, which is, one, I'm curious if Lego could ever create a secondary company that is affiliated with Lego, maybe even, minority stake ownership or something to that effect, that uses Lego bricks. We talked about this in our Rated R Lego series, that engages in these adult Lego models. I think adults will do a lot better at processing some of this stuff, right? I think adults certainly have an interest in it. We've seen brands like Kobe. We see people using Lego and removing printing on them and stuff and repurposing them. So like, we know that there's a market out there for this. Could Lego ultimately, would it make sense for them as a corporation to engage in it in a way that insulates the core Lego brand, but it still allows them to take advantage of a market that we know is out there and is available? And I guess the interesting question ultimately is just like, what is it worth to Lego in the long run? Does that still allow them to maintain their brand integrity? And that's kind of an open I have. My second point, though, and I'll let you answer that question here in a second, is that conflict is inherent to the human history and human nature. And we've talked about this, if I have an Egyptian, minifigure, if I have a Greek warrior minifigure, a Mongolian warrior minifigure, I'm paying homage to conflict that occurred in the past. So it's not even like we can ever find a period of time where conflict isn't a thing. And so is it a bad thing for Lego, to engage in this? And to what extent, right? And again, I think that's where that helps inform that where that line exists is that idea of like realism, recency, all play a huge impact into why Lego, puts the line where it is. It's why we can get German soldiers from World War II, featured in Indiana Jones, but we don't get a German World War II set, right? It's nuanced. It's difficult. And if you're someone who wants to look at the world in a very binary way, that might be hard to understand why Lego does what it does.
I'll end with this. We will probably never get a General Robert E. Lee minifigure. But
for good cause.
We may get a Dukes of Hazzard General Lee Dodge Challenger. Speed champions.
Maybe not. With just the sticker.
We would
never
get that. They would make the top of it very differently. I mean, maybe would be kind of messed up. I mean, that'd be so messed up, anyways. But it has a smart brick and it says Dixie. It sings Dixie whenever you honk the horn. Like that would be so messed up. So again, the interpretation of I'll know what it is when I see it, right? Like, yeah. But a generally speed champion would would kind of pass the sniff test based off of it's a licensed vehicle. It's not based off of a real thing. It's a fantasy vehicle. That was the name of we've got a Red Baron fighting ace.
Yeah. So I mean, Dukes of Hazzard though.
The intent was removed from the person. No, Dukes of Hazzard totally
popularity, right? So that's the one thing.
Somebody's brave enough to put that on Lego Ideas, or I guess brave is not the adjective I want to use to describe that, but certainly willing enough, I suppose. And with that, West, I think, did you have any final comments?
No, I mean, I think that's it, right? I don't think we've arrived at any answers per se. Certainly any satisfying ones. But
no, sure. Yeah, we shouldn't.
I think
though.
That's kind of the point.
It should really be up to the listener. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, right, like everyone has their own ways to engage in the hobby. Clearly, there's people who want to engage in it in a more realistic, military-based way, and we'll link some of these articles we chatted on today of things like the CNN article about the Osprey, because really what that article was highlighting was that there's this whole secondary market of people using Legos to depict war machines. Right, even though Lego themselves say they won't. So there's people out there who are doing stuff in this category. If you're interested, I will leave the interesting comparison. While Denmark and Lego has not engaged in this, brands like Playmobil have, and so they have created more realistic weaponry. They have created things like there was a Civil War series in Playmobil. It was
a Western series, but it had Union soldiers who obviously went west, and then also for whatever reason they threw in Confederate soldiers, which was like, wait, what?
So like we have seen other companies.
Germany, you're kind of misremembering how the West was won, but okay, we'll go with it.
But point is that
like, it was fun to play with.
Yeah, and there were interesting. Like this isn't universal to Europe per se. Like there are people who are willing to engage in more realistic stuff. So.
And there was even a Playmobil figure that depicted Robert E. Lee. So
yeah, or at least heavily sort of suggested that, right?
Yep. Big old beard, little pot belly,
white hair.
Talked with the Potomac Southern drawl. But anyway, so we digress. Again, the goal was not to have an answers. The goal was to highlight times Lego has broken the rules. Maybe kind of flirted with the line of where the rules are driven. And please let us know your thoughts in the comments and other also. I think these are certainly some of the more notorious sets. But where have you kind of seen a set that said, actually that's maybe crossing a line for me personally? I would love to hear about all that. But with that, West, how about we head over to some brick mail?
Let's do it.
Brick mail.
Well, Grinch, first up for brick mail today, we have a note from Nick Schaefer, who wrote in on Spotify and said, "Love finding a podcast about Lego that doesn't just talk about sets. Thank you for having some thinking conversations. Side note about single-use plastic definition, or side note, single-use plastic definition is designed to be used only once before being discarded, often within minutes." Nick says that Lego bricks would be the complete opposite side of that spectrum, considering I have bricks that are almost 4 years old. So I definitely think of plastic straws and Lego bricks differently. Just my 2 cents, but thank you for the conversation. And Nick, yeah, I think that's an interesting point that you bring up, and certainly fair, right? I was the one who called out Lego for effectively being single-use plastic. I would argue to some extent, though, right? Like if you held on to a water bottle for 40 years, which please don't, the microplastics in that leaching into the water would be disgusting. But if you were to hold on to a water bottle for 40 years, right, and then use it after 40 years, like I don't know if the duration, obviously in your definition, you say intended to be used within minutes, right? But like, fair point, right? Fair point. But with Lego, right, you build it and you're kind of like, what does it do other than that? And so I guess that would be why I would kind of qualify that as single use to some extent. But I totally understand where you're coming from. I think you're probably right. Maybe it is a little harsh to call Lego single use plastic. Their containers, like that they shipped the Lego pieces in, certainly I think would qualify as single use. But yeah, maybe not the Lego bricks themselves. So thank you for writing in, and we appreciate you listening.
Yeah, no, Nick, I absolutely agree. And I think it's an important distinction. I think sometimes when we're in the flow of the conversation, we may say like a single use plastic and like with the intent of maybe meaning that it doesn't become used as one, that somebody doesn't just open up a set and throw it out sort of thing. Because yeah, I would absolutely agree. Like, I mean, I would not define my mouse as a single use plastic because I've had it for a year and I didn't just open it. It's not a travel mouse that I get from Delta when I fly that they give to me when I check onto the plane and say, "Here's your mouse for the flight, sir." Heck, even when they do that with their headphones, I actually still have my headphones from like 5 years ago from when Delta gave. I've got 2 that I just have in my bag that I reuse. So I absolutely agree that, and even the whole point of Lego is to rebuild and build and rebuild and build, right? And take apart. And that's why they give you stuff like a brick separator, right? So certainly a fair point to call out. Grinch and West, your last episode about what to do with old Lego was fantastic. At 43, I was recently diagnosed with ADHD, sorry, I should clarify. And with everyone in my household also being diagnosed, it has been a process of learning not only how to raise someone with it, but also how to understand how mind works. I'm realizing that a lot of things from my past now have explanations, and I'm just starting to learn how to manage it. As I have mentioned before, I have been catching up on your old episodes, and I'm almost completely caught up. Grinch, I really appreciate your openness about your ADHD. Hearing you talk about it has helped me realize things I did not quite connect to ADHD before, like the dopamine hit from buying a Lego set, building the collection, and the feeling of needing to have it all. So this last episode hit me a little hard in a good way. Building Lego is very therapeutic for me. The quiet it brings to my mind while I build is exactly what I need with a chaotic home and a chaotic job. At the same time, Lego can also bring me anxiety. Honestly, sometimes the podcast can feed that a little bit too. But episodes like this one help in a good way because they push me to reflect on the hobby. You talked a lot about self-reflection in the hobby, and sometimes stopping to look in the mirror is not very fun. Like you, Grinch, I think I need to focus my collection and set some boundaries. Listening to you talk about your ADHD really put a flashlight on mine and made me realize I need to think about what I want my collection to be and where I want it to go. What got me into Lego was Star Wars and Harry Potter, but both of those themes are huge and very repetitive. After listening to you guys, I'm starting to realize that what I really enjoy are the modular buildings and some of the more classic Lego themes. I think that is where I need to focus if I want my collection to feel more meaningful and purposeful. A few quick thoughts about the show as well. I like that you moved What Are You Building ahead of the Lego news. That change makes the show flow better. I would also say give yourselves a little more grace about the tangents. I can tell sometimes you're trying really hard to stay on topic, especially West. What? But some of the your funniest and best moments come from those tangents. If it happened constantly, it'd be distracting, but sometimes hearing you talk about non-Lego is part of the fun. You have also done a better job breaking up topics. Early on, there was a lot of Star Wars grouped together. I love Star Wars and I like Dave Filoni too, but the pacing of the show feels better now. Lastly, it's nice knowing there's a community of like-minded people out there. I used to be the weird guy who talked about comics, and now I'm the weird guy who talks a lot about Lego and likes showing off his office. Knowing there are other AFOLs out there brings some peace of mind, and it is nice knowing this crazy hobby is shared by others. So thank you for the connection to the community and for the great listen. Sorry for a long email. Pez. Wes, I'm just gonna let the saliva catch up to my mouth here for a second, if you don't mind. No,
yeah,
that was awesome, Pez.
I wanted to throw you a long one here, Grinch, for once.
Well, I think it's it can be scary being on the show and stating your opinion. I mean, we stated a lot of opinions today, and that can sometimes be scary because you never know what people are going to agree with and what they're not. And so it's always nice when you offer up transparency about your own personal journey. You also know that you have listeners that are offering up that same level of transparency and that it's resonating with them. So happy that we can be a conduit to the hobby for you, and also self-reflection. And adult is part of an adult fan of Lego, and sometimes that can be the hardest part about being an AFOL can be the adult part sometimes, right? You can get somebody and you can buy a set, but also balancing everyday life can really be the challenge. And I think that's why Lego resonates with so many adults these days. But I'm happy to hear that you've kind of found a place in the podcast, and we try to balance the tangents. Certainly, it can be. We've tried to, and I think I'm glad you kind of picked up on it. We try to have the episodes be a little bit more focused on a specific topic. I think before, when we did the theme reviews, we kind of started with the sets and then just that was it. Whereas now we kind of have more of a, I think, for example, the Western, it was more of is the Western theme appropriate today, was kind of the overarching theme that brought that together. And then we talked about the sets and how that kind of supports some of that conversation, how that doesn't, versus just, scrolling through essentially a brick set filtered browser of Western sets and just saying, well, here's number 1, here's number 2, here's number 3. We want to have that, as West would say, adult focused conversation that you could have over a glass of scotch near a fire after a nice dinner sort of conversation with a cigar.
Absolutely.
Or whatever you like.
With all of those
or apple juice, because we're adults and everything's okay.
Yeah, Pez, I just wanted to comment too. I mean, like Grinch mentioned,
in the spirit of transparency, my name is Grant. If West hasn't leaked that enough, his name's Ian.
Oh, wow! Thanks for
his social security
me.
number is.
No, point is that
1, 2, 3, 4.
We can have preferences, we can have opinions, right? And I think that's important, and it's important for us to share that, right? And I think that's healthy. It's what has to happen. The difference, I think, and where sometimes it takes restraint on both of our parts, although I think we've gotten pretty practiced at this point, is we share things like, hey, this set isn't for me, and here's why, right? Rather than saying something like, well, this set is stupid. And I do think you see that a little bit still sometimes with some of the younger contributors to the AFOL community who still haven't quite gotten to a point of maturity where they can recognize that saying things like this set is stupid is maybe not super healthy for both the larger Lego environment or themselves as they learn to communicate in an appropriate way, right? But again, that doesn't mean we don't have opinions. And so I know both Grinch and I take a lot of pains to make sure that when we are sharing things like opinions on different things about the series or the set, even in today's episode, right, we were careful with the choice of our language and how we approach that, because we understand that for one AFOL, any given AFOL, anyone else has a whole separate experience, a life experience that to draw upon. So Thank you. We appreciate you writing in and sharing with us, and excited to hear more about your own Lego journey.
And I'd want to challenge something you just said a little bit too, West. I wouldn't even necessarily, my personal opinion, wouldn't necessarily be that it's younger contributors to the community. It's less emotionally intelligent contributors to the community, which oftentimes corresponds with things like maturity and age, but not always, right? You certainly get opinions out there that are, well, this set is not Star Wars, so it sucks.
Yeah.
Or this is Friends, or this smart brick, like, this isn't, I think this is stupid. Who would ever buy this? If you buy it, you're an idiot. Like, that's not a productive conversation. And, I even challenge Wes sometimes, like, it's okay for us to have different opinions on the show, because otherwise, what would be the point of having two of us on the show? Mm-hmm. If Wes was going to say something and I was going to say, I agree, and then let me say the exact same thing you're about to say, West, then that's not a conversation.
Yeah, it becomes pretty boring.
So I'd even take it a step further, Wes, to say, like, it's okay to, we want to voice our opinions, and it's okay for you to have another opinion, and that's why we have Brick Mail, is so that people can share that, right? We wanted that avenue to bring some of those different opinions to life. I think that's that's the power of having a conversation, having an opinion, and that's why you as an individual can bring value to a conversation, a family, an organization, the world, because you have your own opinion, and that's what's important.
Absolutely. Our last brick mail today comes from Milo, who writes in, hey, Grinch and West, I just wanted to tell you my first Rebrickable mock finally got accepted. Thank you guys for all your support. Love the podcast. Can't wait to see what you do next week. Here's a link to my model. We're going to link that in the link tree. It is the Wheeler house from Stranger Things that he put together. And boy, oh boy, is it fun to look at all the stuff that he has going on. He has the basement set up in it. He has the main floor and the second floor. Or if you're of the European persuasion, the ground floor and the first floor. But it's a lot of fun. It looks like the kind of standard, I would call it like the box on box house from the 1970s America. And so if you grew up in one of those houses, which Grinch and I grew up in a house kind of heavily designed on something like this, it brings back a lot of nostalgia. So thank you, Milo, for putting that together. I hope I pronounced that correct. If it's Milo or Milo, apologies. But appreciate you writing in, and yeah, happy to share that Rebrickable mock link with everybody else. So thank you.
Folks, on the show, it is mock number 254033 on Rebrickable. And one thing I really like about it is kind of like we talked about the helicarrier, it's just well polished and clean, but consistently throughout. So he uses, or she uses a technique for the rock. So it's not just the house on the base, it's actually the house built on a base of rock. So you get the basement as well. But then there's I'd say a fairly well-known technique, but I don't think a fairly often used technique of creating some texture in a build where you have two layers of bricks. So you've got your front layer and your background layer, and the background layer is essentially just the wall, the slab, the foundation of the basement. And then there's a layer in front of that is, if you think of like a rim around a diorama base, right, that you'd put a tile on, he uses or she uses some bricks to create a rock work within that, and then tiles off the top of it and in various different ways, slopes, etc., so that it feels like it's popping out, but it's still remaining just as polished as the rest of the build is. So kind of kudos to you for doing some really good technique work like that, while also keeping it consistent throughout the model so that it all feels cohesive and like one piece.
Absolutely.
And that is a wrap of another episode of AFOLs Welcome. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you're listening to the show. If you'd like to write the podcast, please email us at afolswelcome@gmail.com or follow us on Instagram at AFOLsWelcome. Thank you for listening, and we will catch you on the next one.
See ya.